6 months after the canceled wedding, Kate was walking through downtown when she spotted a familiar figure sitting alone at a corner coffee shop. It was Sarah, the woman whose unexpected appearance had changed everything. Kate felt her heart race for a moment, but instead of anger or resentment, she found herself feeling curious about the woman who had unknowingly saved her from a loveless marriage. Kate approached Sarah's table and introduced herself. Sarah's face went pale with recognition, and she immediately began apologizing profusely for ruining Kate's wedding day. But Kate surprised both of them by sitting down and asking if they could talk. What followed was an honest conversation that lasted over an hour and gave Kate closure she didn't know she needed. Sarah explained that she had returned from Paris 3 weeks before the wedding to attend her father's funeral. While she was in town, she had heard about William's upcoming marriage through mutual friends. She had wrestled with whether to contact him, but had finally decided she needed to see him one last time to properly close that chapter of her life and wish him well. The conversation revealed that Sarah had actually come to the wedding to tell William she was engaged to a wonderful man she had met in Paris. She wanted William to know she was happy and to release him from any guilt he might have been carrying about their breakup. Sarah had no idea that her presence would cause such dramatic consequences, or that William was still harboring feelings for her after all these years. Sarah told Kate that she felt terrible about what had happened and wanted to make sure Kate knew that there had been no conspiracy or secret plan. She had simply wanted closure and had chosen the wrong time and place to seek it. Kate found herself thanking Sarah instead of blaming her, explaining that Sarah's appearance had revealed a truth that needed to come out before it was too late. As autumn turned to winter, Kate threw herself into activities and hobbies she had neglected while planning the wedding. She took painting classes at the local community center, discovering she had a talent for watercolor landscapes. She joined a hiking group and made new friends who knew nothing about her canceled wedding. She traveled to places she had always wanted to visit, including a solo trip to New York City, where she saw Broadway shows and visited museums. When people asked Kate if she regretted calling off the wedding, she always gave the same answer. She regretted the pain and embarrassment, but she would never regret choosing herself over settling for half-hearted love. She had learned that being alone was better than being with someone who couldn't love her completely and without reservation. Kate's confidence and self-esteem grew stronger with each passing month. She realized that she had been trying so hard to make her relationship with William work that she had lost sight of her own needs and desires. Now she was rediscovering who she was as an individual and learning to enjoy her own company without feeling lonely or incomplete. A year after the canceled wedding, Kate was browsing in a bookstore when she struck up a conversation with a man who was looking at the same travel guide she was considering. David was a teacher who shared Kate's love of adventure and had traveled to many of the places she dreamed of visiting. Their conversation flowed easily and naturally in a way that felt completely different from her early interactions with William. When David asked Kate out for coffee, she felt a flutter of excitement that she hadn't experienced in years. As they got to know each other over the following months, Kate realized she was feeling something she had never felt with William. This was what real love was supposed to feel like: complete mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine excitement about building a future together. Kate understood now that her canceled wedding had been one of the best things that had ever happened to her. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to find your way to something much better. The morning sun painted golden streams across the marble floor of St. Mary's Cathedral as Kate stood before the tall mirror in the bridal preparation room. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the delicate pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The same necklace had been worn by 3 generations of brides in her family. Today it would bring her luck and love, just as it had for the women before her. Kate had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl playing in her mother's closet. She would wrap herself in old curtains and pretend they were wedding veils while walking down imaginary aisles. Now, at 28 years old, she was living that childhood dream. Her reflection showed a woman transformed. The ivory silk dress hugged her figure perfectly, while the cathedral-length veil cascaded behind her like a waterfall of dreams. The preparation room buzzed with excited energy As her 4 bridesmaids moved around her like busy bees, Sarah, her maid of honor, was adjusting the train of her dress for the 100th time. Jenny was touching up her lipstick while Maria fixed a loose curl that had escaped from her elegant updo. Lisa, the youngest of the group, was taking pictures with her phone, capturing every precious moment. Outside the preparation room, Kate could hear the sounds of guests arriving. Car doors slammed in the parking lot, followed by the click of high heels on stone steps. Voices mixed together, creating a symphony of celebration. The florist had delivered the arrangements early that morning. White roses and baby's breath filled every corner of the cathedral, creating a garden of pure romance. Kate's wedding dress had taken 6 months to make. She had visited the boutique 12 times for fittings, making sure every detail was perfect. The bodice was covered in tiny crystals that caught the light when she moved. The skirt flowed out from her waist like something from a fairy tale. She felt like a princess ready to meet her prince. William had proposed to her exactly 1 year ago during a romantic dinner at the restaurant where they had their first date. He had hidden the ring in her dessert and gotten down on one knee right there in front of everyone. Kate had cried happy tears as she said yes over and over again. The ring was everything she had ever wanted. A classic solitaire diamond that sparkled like a captured star. The past year of wedding planning had been a whirlwind of decisions. Choosing flowers, selecting music, picking the perfect menu, and finding the right photographer. Kate had enjoyed every minute of it. She loved planning and organizing, and her wedding was the biggest project of her life. Everything had to be perfect because this day would be remembered forever. Her mother knocked softly on the door before entering. Tears were already forming in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. Kate was her only child, and letting her go was both joyful and heartbreaking. She handed Kate something blue, a small handkerchief embroidered with her new initials. It completed the tradition, something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. The church organ began to play soft melodies as the last guests found their seats. Kate could hear the music through the thick wooden door, and her heart began to race with anticipation. In just a few minutes, she would walk down that long aisle toward William, who was waiting for her at the altar. Their 3 years together had led to this perfect moment. Kate took one final look in the mirror and smiled. She had never felt more beautiful or more ready to begin the rest of her life. This was her moment, her day, her dream coming true. Nothing could possibly go wrong on such a perfect morning. The heavy wooden doors of St. Mary's Cathedral opened with a gentle creak that seemed to echo through the entire building. Kate felt her father's strong arm linked with hers as they stepped into the main sanctuary. The moment she appeared in the doorway, 200 guests rose to their feet in perfect unison, like a wave of respect and admiration washing over her. The sight before Kate took her breath away. The cathedral stretched out like a magnificent tunnel of love leading to her future. White rose petals had been scattered along the red carpet runner that seemed to go on forever. Tall candles flickered on either side of the aisle, casting dancing shadows on the ancient stone walls. The stained glass windows filtered the morning sunlight into rainbows of color that painted everything in magical hues. Kate could hear soft gasps and whispered compliments from the guests as she began her slow walk forward. Her dress rustled gently with each step, and her veil flowed behind her like a cloud. She had practiced this walk so many times, but nothing had prepared her for the real moment. Her heart hammered in her chest so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Her father walked beside her with measured steps, keeping perfect pace with the wedding march that filled the air. Kate could feel his emotions even though he was trying to stay strong. His little girl was becoming a woman and starting her own family. Every few steps, he would squeeze her arm, gently letting her know he was proud and happy for her. As they moved down the aisle, Kate saw familiar faces on both sides. Her college roommates were dabbing their eyes with tissues. Her coworkers from the office waved and smiled. William's family filled the right side of the cathedral. His mother was crying tears of joy, while his father stood tall and proud. Everyone she loved was here to witness this moment. The white roses in her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. She had chosen them because they were William's favorite flower. The florist had wrapped the stems in ivory ribbon that matched her dress perfectly. Small crystals were scattered among the petals, catching the light and sparkling like tiny stars. Kate's eyes searched ahead, looking for William at the altar. There he was, standing tall in his navy blue suit that they had picked out together 6 months ago. He looked so handsome with his dark hair perfectly styled and his shoes polished to a mirror shine. But something seemed different about him. His posture was stiff and his face looked pale under the cathedral lights. As Kate got closer, she expected to see William's warm smile, the one that always made her feel like the most important person in the world. Instead, his expression was frozen, like he had seen something shocking. His eyes weren't focused on her beautiful dress or her radiant smile. He was staring at something behind her with a look she had never seen before. The wedding march continued to play, but Kate felt her steps beginning to slow. This wasn't the reaction she had dreamed about. William should be beaming with joy watching his bride walk toward him. Instead, he stood completely motionless, his mouth slightly open and his eyes wide with what looked like fear or surprise. Kate's mind began to race with questions. What was William looking at? Why did he seem so startled? This was supposed to be the happiest moment of their lives, but something was very wrong. Kate finally reached the altar where William stood waiting, but nothing felt right. Her father gently placed her hand in William's, but William's palm was cold and sweaty. His fingers barely closed around hers, as if he wasn't really there. Kate looked up into his face, expecting to see love and joy, but instead saw confusion and shock written across his features. The officiant smiled warmly at both of them and opened his leather-bound book, ready to begin the ceremony. The congregation settled into their seats with soft, rustling sounds of fabric and whispered conversations. Everyone was waiting for the beautiful words that would join Kate and William together as husband and wife. But William seemed frozen in time, unable to move or speak. Kate followed William's gaze, trying to understand what had captured his attention so completely. She turned her head slowly, looking out over the sea of faces that filled the cathedral. Her eyes moved from row to row, searching for whatever had shocked William so deeply. Then she saw her. There in the third row on the left side sat a woman Kate had never seen before in her life. The woman was strikingly beautiful, with long dark hair that fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. She wore a navy blue dress that seemed to match William's suit perfectly, as if they had planned it together. Her makeup was flawless, and her jewelry was elegant and expensive looking. But it wasn't just the woman's beauty that caught Kate's attention. It was the way she was looking at William. Her eyes were locked on his face with an expression that spoke of deep familiarity and shared history. There was something intimate and knowing in her gaze, as if she and William shared secrets that no one else in the cathedral knew about. Kate felt her heart skip a beat as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just a random wedding guest. This woman meant something to William, something important enough to make him freeze on his wedding day. The realization hit Kate like a cold wave washing over her body. Her hands began to shake, and her bouquet trembled in her grip. The woman's eyes never left William's face. She sat perfectly still, but her presence seemed to fill the entire cathedral. Other guests were starting to notice that something was wrong. Heads began to turn and whispered conversations started up again. The officiant cleared his throat softly, trying to regain everyone's attention, and moved the ceremony forward. Kate's father noticed the tension and squeezed her arm gently. Her mother was leaning forward in the front row. The mysterious woman in the navy blue dress slowly rose from her seat in the third row. Every eye in the cathedral. William stepped closer to Kate and began to speak in whispers that only she could hear. His confession came out in broken pieces, like a puzzle that had been shattered and was being put back together, one painful piece at a time. The woman was Sarah, his college girlfriend, who had moved to Paris 5 years ago for a job opportunity with an international company. Kate listened in stunned silence as William revealed that he and Sarah had been together for 2 years during college. They had been deeply in love and had even talked about marriage before she received the job offer in Paris. Sarah had wanted William to move with her, but he had been too afraid to leave everything behind and start over in a foreign country. The breakup had been devastating for both of them, William continued. Sarah had begged him to reconsider and promised to wait for him if he changed his mind. But William had been stubborn and scared, believing that long-distance relationships never worked. He had convinced himself that letting her go was the right thing to do, even though it broke his heart. William admitted that he had never fully gotten over Sarah, even after she moved thousands of miles away. He had tried to move on with his life, and had thought he succeeded when he met Kate 3 years ago. Kate had been kind and loving and patient with him. She had helped him believe in love again, and he had convinced himself that what he felt for her was enough to build a marriage on. But seeing Sarah unexpectedly at their wedding had brought back a flood of emotions that William thought he had buried forever. All the love he had felt for her came rushing back like a dam that had suddenly burst. He realized in that moment that he had been lying to himself about his feelings, and worse, he had been lying to Kate. Kate's hands began to tremble as she processed this information. Her mind flashed back to moments in their relationship when William had seemed distant or distracted. She remembered times when he would stare off into space with a sad expression that he could never quite explain. Now she wondered if those moments had been about Sarah all along. William continued his confession, telling Kate that Sarah had tried to contact him several times over the past year. She had sent emails and text messages that he had ignored or deleted without reading. He claimed he didn't know she was back in town and certainly had no idea she would show up at their wedding. He swore that he had no contact with her and had no idea how she even knew about the wedding. The guests were growing more restless as they watched the intense conversation happening at the altar. Whispered conversations were breaking out throughout the cathedral as people tried to figure out what was going on. Some guests were checking their phones while others were looking around for someone to explain the situation. The officiant stood patiently waiting, but clearly concerned about the delay. Kate felt like she was in a bad dream that she couldn't wake up from. Everything she had believed about her relationship with William was crumbling before her eyes. She thought about all the times he had told her he loved her and wondered if he had meant it or if he had been thinking about Sarah. She remembered their engagement and their wedding plans and realized that maybe William had been going through the motions rather than following his heart. The weight of William's betrayal felt crushing, but what made it worse was that it was happening in front of everyone they loved. Kate could feel the eyes of 200 guests watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. This should have been the happiest moment of her life, but instead it had become the most humiliating and heartbreaking experience she could imagine. Standing at the altar in her dream wedding dress, Kate felt something unexpected wash over her. Instead of the crushing despair she thought she would feel, there was a strange sense of clarity filling her mind. She looked at William, really looked at him, and saw not the man she thought she was marrying, but someone who was clearly still in love with another woman. The realization was painful, but it was also liberating in a way she hadn't expected. Kate had always prided herself on being smart and strong and independent. She had worked hard to build a successful career and had never been the type of woman to settle for less than she deserved. Why should her wedding day be any different? Kate took a deep breath and turned away from William to face the congregation. 200 guests looked back at her with expressions of confusion, concern, and curiosity. Some people were leaning forward in their seats trying to hear what was happening, while others sat back with worried frowns. The cathedral had never been so quiet during a wedding ceremony. Kate's voice was steady and clear when she spoke, despite the fact that her heart felt like it was breaking into a million pieces. "I'm sorry, everyone," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "but there won't be a wedding today." Gasps and murmurs immediately filled the cathedral as people tried to process what they had just heard. Kate continued speaking with a strength that surprised even herself. "Sometimes life shows us things we need to see even when we don't want to see them. Today I learned that the man I thought I was marrying is still in love with someone else. I have too much respect for myself and for all of you to go through with a marriage that would be built on a lie." William grabbed her arm desperately, trying to stop her from saying more. "Kate, please," he whispered urgently. "Don't do this. We can work through this together. I promise I can forget about Sarah and focus only on our future. Just give me a chance to prove it to you." His eyes were filled with panic and regret, but Kate could see that his words weren't completely honest. Kate gently pulled her arm away from his grip and shook her head. "William, I believe that you want to forget about Sarah," she said softly. "But wanting something and being able to do it are two different things. You've been carrying a torch for her for 5 years. That doesn't just disappear because you want it to. I deserve to be with someone who chooses me completely, not someone who settles for me because their first choice isn't available." The bridesmaids quickly moved to surround Kate, forming a protective circle around her. Sarah, the maid of honor, put her arm around Kate's shoulders while the other girls stood ready to support whatever decision she made. They had all seen the pain in Kate's eyes and understood that she was making the right choice, even though it was the hardest one. Kate's parents looked shocked, but there was also pride in their expressions. They had raised their daughter to be strong and independent, and they could see that strength shining through even in this terrible moment. Kate's father stood up from his seat, ready to help his daughter in whatever way she needed. Her mother was crying, but nodding her head in agreement with Kate's decision. The wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures, completely understanding that this was not a moment to be captured for posterity. The organist sat at her bench, unsure whether to keep playing or stop. The florist, who had been adjusting arrangements near the altar, quietly stepped back to give the family privacy. Kate looked around the cathedral one more time, taking in the flowers, the candles, and all the beautiful decorations that had been meant to celebrate her new beginning. Instead, they had become the backdrop for one of the most difficult decisions of her life. But as hard as it was, Kate knew she was doing the right thing. Kate lifted the front of her wedding dress slightly and began walking down the aisle for the second time that day. But this time she was leaving as a single woman with her head held high and her dignity intact. Her bridesmaids formed a protective wall around her as they moved together toward the back of the cathedral. Their colorful dresses created a rainbow of support surrounding Kate's white gown. The guests stood up as she passed, creating a pathway of stunned silence. Some people were openly crying, while others whispered among themselves, trying to understand what had just happened. A few guests reached out to touch Kate's hand or shoulder, offering silent support as she walked by. The elderly ladies from her church were dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs, while the younger guests stared in shock. William remained at the altar, looking completely lost and devastated. His best man tried to comfort him, but William seemed unable to move or respond. The groomsmen gathered around him, unsure of what to do or say. The officiant closed his book and quietly slipped away to give the family privacy. Even he had never experienced anything like this in all of his years of performing wedding ceremonies. Kate's father quickly took charge of the situation like the natural leader he had always been. He spoke quietly to the wedding coordinator, asking her to make announcements about the reception being canceled and helping guests understand what needed to happen next. Some people would need directions to local restaurants, while others might want to stay and offer support to the family. Kate's mother was already on her phone calling the caterer, the band, and the photographer to let them know about the situation. She was crying but still handling the practical details that needed attention. The wedding cake would need to be dealt with, and the flowers could be donated to local hospitals. There were 100 small details that would need to be managed in the coming hours. In the bridal preparation room, Kate sat down heavily in the same chair where she had been so happy just 2 hours earlier. The room looked exactly the same, but everything felt completely different. Her beautiful wedding dress suddenly felt heavy and uncomfortable instead of magical and perfect. The veil that had made her feel like a princess now felt like a costume from a play that had ended badly. Her maid of honor, Sarah, began helping her out of the dress, while her other bridesmaids fielded phone calls and tried to manage the chaos that was unfolding. Kate's cousin Lisa was dealing with confused relatives who were calling to ask what had happened. Jenny was talking to the photographer about what to do with all the pictures that had been taken before the ceremony went wrong. Kate stared at herself in the mirror and saw a completely different person than she had seen that morning. She was no longer a glowing bride filled with hopes and dreams. Instead, she was a woman who had just saved herself from making the biggest mistake of her life. The pain was real and sharp, but underneath it was a growing sense of relief that surprised her. As Kate changed into regular clothes, she began to think about all the signs she had missed or ignored. William's distant moods, his reluctance to talk about his past relationships, and his sometimes distracted behavior during romantic moments. She had attributed these things to pre-wedding nerves or work stress, but now she realized they had been warning signs that she had chosen not to see. The hardest part wasn't losing William, Kate realized. The hardest part was mourning the future she had planned and the dreams she had invested in their relationship. She had imagined their children, their home together, and growing old side by side. All of those dreams had just disappeared in the space of a few minutes, but Kate was beginning to understand that they had been built on a foundation that was never solid to begin with. In the weeks that followed, Kate learned more about William and Sarah's relationship than she ever wanted to know. Well-meaning friends and family members began sharing information they had kept to themselves during the engagement. Several people admitted they had suspected William wasn't completely over his ex-girlfriend, but hadn't wanted to interfere with the wedding plans. Kate's college friend Michelle revealed that she had seen William and Sarah texting each other at Kate's birthday party 6 months earlier. Her coworker Janet mentioned that William had seemed distracted and sad whenever anyone mentioned Paris or France in casual conversation. Even Kate's own mother admitted that she had worried about William's commitment, but had hoped marriage would help him settle down and focus on Kate. Kate felt foolish for missing all these signs, but she also felt grateful that the truth had come out before she had legally bound herself to someone who couldn't fully commit to her. She spent many nights crying into her pillow, mourning not just the loss of William, but the loss of the future she had planned. The apartment they had picked out together, the honeymoon they had booked, and the life they were supposed to build all felt like dreams that had turned into nightmares. Returning all the wedding gifts was one of the most difficult tasks Kate had to face. Each package she sent back represented someone who had believed in her relationship and had wanted to celebrate her happiness. She wrote personal notes to each gift giver, explaining the situation and thanking them for their support. Most people responded with kind messages telling her they admired her strength and courage. The honeymoon to Italy had to be canceled, which meant losing most of the money they had paid for flights and hotels. Kate decided to take a smaller trip by herself, instead visiting her aunt in California for a week of healing and reflection. The ocean air and quiet walks on the beach helped her begin to process everything that had happened and think about what she wanted for her future. Kate started seeing a therapist to work through her feelings about the failed relationship and the public humiliation of the canceled wedding. Dr. Martins helped her understand that William's inability to let go of Sarah wasn't a reflection of Kate's worth as a person. She learned that some people get stuck in the past and can't move forward even when they want to. The therapy sessions helped Kate realize that she had ignored her own instincts about William because she had wanted so badly to believe in their relationship. She had convinced herself that his occasional distance was normal and that all couples had problems. Now she understood the importance of trusting her feelings and not making excuses for someone else's behavior. Kate threw herself into her work at the marketing company, where she had been employed for 4 years. Her boss had been very understanding about the situation and had given her extra time off to deal with the aftermath of the canceled wedding. When she returned to work, Kate found that focusing on her career helped distract her from her personal problems and reminded her of her own capabilities and talents. Friends and family rallied around Kate in ways that surprised and touched her deeply. Her sister flew in from Denver to spend a week with her, just talking and watching movies and eating ice cream. Her best friend from high school organized a girls' weekend trip to the mountains where they hiked and laughed, and reminded Kate of who she was before William came into her life. Slowly, Kate began to see the canceled wedding not as a failure or a tragedy, but as a powerful lesson about self-worth and the importance of being with someone who chooses you completely. She started to understand that calling off the wedding had been one of the bravest things she had ever done, and that she had saved herself from years of wondering if she was second choice in her own marriage.